Like, comment, and subscribe.
Once upon a time, in a quiet kingdom surrounded by rolling meadows and whispering forests, there lived a sweet young girl named Ella. Her mother had passed away when she was very small, leaving behind only tender memories and words of kindness. Her father, a respected merchant, loved Ella dearly. But as time moved on, loneliness pressed upon him, and he believed it best to remarry. Perhaps, he thought, a new wife would help bring balance and warmth back into their household. The woman he chose was outwardly beautiful, but carried within her a prideful, cold heart. She had 2 daughters of her own, each spoiled, selfish, and unkind. At first, Ella hoped they might become her sisters in truth, sharing laughter and simple joys. But it did not take long for her to see the difference in how they were treated. Her new stepmother lavished attention upon her daughters, dressing them in fine clothes and silks, feeding them sweet cakes, and praising them without reason. Ella, however, was given the plainest garments and endless chores. From sunrise to nightfall, she scrubbed floors, washed dishes, polished furniture, and served her stepmother and stepsisters with little thanks. Whenever she finished her work, she would sit by the fireplace to keep warm, her face smudged with ash. It was her stepsisters who first mocked her, calling her Cinderella, because of the cinders that clung to her skin. Instead of her true name, this cruel nickname stuck. Yet Ella bore it quietly, never raising her voice, never letting bitterness poison her gentle heart. In the stillness of the night, when the house finally grew quiet, Cinderella would look out the window at the starlit sky. She whispered her wishes into the darkness, hoping for kindness, hoping for love. For though her life was heavy with hardship, her spirit held on to hope, and her heart remained pure. What Cinderella did not know was that fate was already turning its wheels, preparing to change her life forever. Life under her stepmother's rule grew harsher with every passing season. Cinderella's father, who had once been her shield, was often away on long journeys for his trade. Whenever he returned, her stepmother greeted him with sweet smiles and polite words, but the moment he departed, her mask of kindness fell away. Cinderella awoke each morning before the sun rose, fetching water from the well, gathering firewood, and lighting the hearth. She cooked breakfast for her stepmother and stepsisters, brushed their hair, laced their gowns, and shined their shoes. Afterward, she swept the floors, washed the linens, and tended to the garden until her hands ached. The stepsisters, however, spent their days in leisure. They sat before the mirror, admiring themselves in jewels and ribbons. They laughed at Cinderella's patched dress, sneered at her plain shoes, and often found excuses to burden her with even more work. Despite this cruelty, Cinderella remained gentle. When the stepsisters lost a ribbon, she found it for them. When they spilled milk, she cleaned it. When they complained of hunger, she served them before feeding herself. Yet, her kindness was never returned. At night, after her work was done, Cinderella would sit by the hearth, her dress stained with soot. The flames flickered and warmed her tired face, and she dreamed of a life beyond her servitude, a life where she might be loved for who she truly was. But dreams often seemed far away, hidden behind her stepmother's stern voice and the laughter of her stepsisters. For in that house, Cinderella was not seen as a daughter, nor even a sister. She was a servant, unworthy of kindness in their eyes. Still, she endured, her spirit quietly shining like the faint glow of embers in the hearth. One bright morning, the air of the household changed. A royal messenger arrived, his voice carrying across the village square. He announced that the king and queen were hosting a grand ball at the palace. The reason for the celebration was joyous. The prince, now of age, was to find a bride. All maidens of noble and respectable households were invited to attend. The news spread like wildfire, filling the kingdom with excitement. Families prepared gowns, polished carriages, and dreamed of the possibility that their daughters might capture the prince's eye. At Cinderella's home, her stepsisters squealed with delight. They imagined themselves in silks of blue and green, their hair adorned with pearls, their necks draped in gold. Their stepmother encouraged their fantasies, declaring that one of them might soon be queen. When Cinderella shyly asked if she might also attend, her stepmother laughed sharply. "You? At the royal ball? With those rags you wear? Don't be foolish, girl. Stay at home where you belong." The stepsisters joined in the mockery. "Cinderella, imagine, dancing among nobles with cinders on your face. The prince would laugh until morning." Cinderella bowed her head and said nothing. Yet in her heart, she longed to see the palace, the music, the lights, the joy. She wished only to be part of that world, even if only for one night. Her stepmother, however, saw her longing and devised a cruel plan. "If you finish every chore in this house, perhaps you may go," she said, her eyes glinting with mischief. "But only if you have a gown fit for a royal ball." With those words, her stepmother believed she had set an impossible task. For how could Cinderella, with her worn dress and endless duties, ever hope to attend? Yet hope still lingered in Cinderella's heart, faint but unbroken. On the day of the ball, the house buzzed with excitement. The stepsisters demanded Cinderella's attention at every turn. She laced their gowns tightly, adjusted their jewels, and curled their hair until her fingers ached. They laughed at her exhaustion, mocking her for not having a gown of her own. As the afternoon faded, Cinderella completed the last of her chores. She hurried to her small chest of belongings, where she had hidden a dress of her mother's. Though old, it was finely made, and Cinderella had carefully mended it in secret. She had sewn on tiny beads, polished the fabric, and hoped it might be enough to pass as suitable for the ball. When she emerged wearing it, her stepsisters gasped, not in admiration, but in jealousy. She looked graceful, her beauty shining even through the modest gown. But her stepmother's eyes narrowed. With a cruel smile, she whispered to her daughters, who lunged forward and tore at Cinderella's dress. Beads scattered across the floor, seams ripped apart, and the once precious garment lay ruined in tatters. "Now you truly have nothing to wear," her stepmother said coldly. "Stay here, and do not even think of coming to the palace." With laughter trailing behind them, her stepmother and stepsisters climbed into their carriage and left for the ball. Cinderella fell to the floor, weeping. Her dreams, carefully stitched together with hope, had been torn apart in an instant. She rushed to the garden, burying her face in her hands, her heart breaking beneath the starlit sky. Yet in that moment of despair, the first spark of magic was about to appear. As Cinderella wept in the garden, the air around her shimmered. A gentle voice called her name, and when she looked up, a woman stood before her, radiant, graceful, and kind-eyed. She carried a staff that glowed faintly with light. "Do not cry, child," the woman said softly. "I am your fairy godmother, and I have come to help you." Cinderella, startled but filled with wonder, whispered, "But how can you help me? My dress is ruined, and I cannot go to the ball." The fairy godmother smiled. "Nothing is impossible when magic is used for kindness. Now, fetch me a pumpkin from the garden." Confused but hopeful, Cinderella obeyed. The fairy godmother tapped the pumpkin with her staff, and before Cinderella's eyes, it transformed into a golden carriage, gleaming beneath the moonlight. Next, the fairy godmother called for the mice that scurried nearby. With a wave of her staff, they grew tall, dressed in fine livery, and stood proudly as footmen. A rat became the coachman, and lizards turned into horses, strong and swift. Finally, the fairy godmother turned to Cinderella. With another wave of her staff, her tattered dress shimmered and transformed into a gown of breathtaking beauty. Its fabric sparkled like starlight, and upon her feet appeared delicate glass slippers, shining with every step. Cinderella gasped, unable to believe her eyes. "Is this real?" she asked. "It is real, but remember, my magic will only last until midnight," the fairy godmother warned. "At the stroke of 12, all will return to what it was. You must leave the ball before then." Cinderella nodded, her heart racing with gratitude. She stepped into the golden carriage, her dreams once broken, now reborn in dazzling light. And with that, she set off toward the palace, where her destiny awaited. The palace shone like a jewel under the night sky, its windows blazing with golden light. Music drifted from the great hall, where nobles in splendid gowns and fine suits danced across the polished floor. When Cinderella's carriage arrived, heads turned. Whispers filled the air as she stepped down gracefully, her gown glittering like the stars above. No one recognized her, not even her own stepmother and stepsisters, who stood among the guests. The prince himself paused, struck by her beauty. He approached her with a bow, offering his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked. Cinderella, her cheeks flushed, nodded. The moment their hands touched, the world around them seemed to fade. Together they glided across the floor, moving as if the music were written only for them. All eyes followed their steps, and murmurs spread through the hall. "Who is she? Where did she come from?" The stepsisters, green with envy, whispered to their mother. "She looks like a princess. Why does the prince give her all his attention?" The stepmother narrowed her eyes, but could not recognize the radiant figure before her. Cinderella and the prince danced again and again, speaking in soft tones between songs. She laughed at his gentle words, and he was enchanted by her kindness and grace. Never before had he met someone who made him feel so alive. Hours passed swiftly, and the clock's hands crept closer to midnight. Yet Cinderella, lost in joy, did not notice the time slipping away. The palace clock began to chime, once, twice, echoing across the hall. Cinderella's heart froze. "Midnight!" She gasped and pulled away from the prince's hand. "I must go," she cried. "Wait, please, tell me your name," he pleaded, reaching after her. But Cinderella could not stay. She rushed through the hall, her gown shimmering as she fled down the grand staircase. In her haste, one glass slipper slipped from her foot and clattered upon the steps. She dared not stop to retrieve it. The clock struck 12, and the magic began to unravel. Her carriage vanished, the horses turned back to lizards, and the coachman to a rat. Her gown dissolved into tattered rags, leaving only the other glass slipper upon her foot. Cinderella ran into the night, her breath trembling, her heart pounding with fear and sorrow. She had danced with the prince, yes, but now all was lost. The prince, however, found the glass slipper. He held it in his hands, determined. "This is the key," he vowed. "I will find her, no matter how long it takes." And so, the chase for Cinderella's true identity began. The next morning, the kingdom buzzed with rumors of the mysterious maiden who had stolen the prince's heart. Couriers spread the news. The prince would search every home in the land. Whoever's foot fit the glass slipper would become his bride. Nobles and commoners alike were filled with hope. Young maidens dreamed of trying the delicate shoe, imagining a life within the palace walls. At Cinderella's home, The stepsisters were beside themselves with excitement. "The prince will choose one of us, surely," they declared, giggling as they polished their nails and practiced their curtsies. When the royal guard finally arrived with the slipper, the stepsisters nearly pushed each other aside to try it. The first sister shoved her foot in, but the slipper was far too small. The second sister fared no better. The delicate shoe would not fit, no matter how she twisted and strained. The stepmother, not ready to admit defeat, suggested they move on. But the prince's attendant asked, "Is there no other young woman in this house?" The stepmother hesitated. "Only a servant girl," she said coldly. "She is not worthy of such honor." But the prince's men insisted, and so Cinderella was summoned. Her stepmother sneered. Her stepsisters laughed, but Cinderella walked forward with quiet grace. She sat, and the slipper was placed upon her foot. It slid on perfectly, as though it had been made for her alone. Gasps filled the room. The stepsisters turned pale, and the stepmother's face hardened with disbelief. Then Cinderella reached into her pocket and revealed the second glass slipper, its twin. The prince himself, who had accompanied his guard, fell to his knees before her. "It is you," he whispered. "You are the one I have been searching for." Cinderella smiled, her heart bursting with joy. For the first time, she was seen not as a servant, but as herself. The revelation left the household in shock. The stepsisters wept bitter tears, realizing the cruelty they had shown to the very sister who would now become a princess. Their stepmother, proud and unyielding, tried to mask her fear, though her plans had crumbled around her. The prince offered his hand to Cinderella. "Come with me to the palace, where you will be cherished and honored." Cinderella, her heart filled with kindness, even after years of suffering, turned to her stepsisters. "I forgive you," she said softly. "Let your hearts learn mercy, and may you never treat another with cruelty again." Her words pierced their hearts, and the stepsisters bowed their heads in shame. The stepmother, however, could not bring herself to apologize. She turned away, her pride forever her downfall. Cinderella did not linger. She stepped into the royal carriage beside the prince, leaving behind the ashes of her past. For the first time, her dream stretched before her in golden light. No longer distant, but real. And so she rode toward her new life, with the prince at her side. The palace gates opened to welcome its new princess. Bells rang across the kingdom, and the people rejoiced. The prince and Cinderella stood together before the court, their love shining brighter than any jewel. The king and queen welcomed her with open arms, praising her grace and humility. They saw in her not only beauty, but kindness and wisdom. A grand wedding was soon held, more magnificent than any the kingdom had seen before. Nobles and villagers alike gathered to celebrate, for all loved the story of the girl who had risen from cinders to become a princess. Cinderella's gown shimmered as she walked down the aisle, her glass slippers sparkling with each step. The prince's eyes never left hers, filled with love and devotion. When they spoke their vows, it was not only a promise of marriage, but a promise of partnership, respect, and compassion. Together, they began their new life, ruling with fairness and kindness. Cinderella never forgot the hardships she had endured, and so she treated everyone in the kingdom with understanding. Her story became a legend, told for generations as proof that hope, kindness, and courage could overcome even the darkest trials. And so, Cinderella and the prince lived happily ever after.